So some of you may remember that a couple weeks ago on my video on the Wuthering Waves anniversary, I brought up that someone in the comment section of another video brought up that Wuthering Waves fans have the same toxic responses to criticism as fans of Helluva vs. Games, with them citing the discourse I was about to discuss as part of the point of that. Well, I was very curious how the comment section of that was gonna go, because it would show how true the assertion really was. But the response of that video was really negligible, but the fact the video is talking shit about Honkai Star Rail storytelling or Genshin's variety of problems have a stronger reaction does indicate something in and of itself. In fact, the response to the Kaniche situation was stronger. In fact, although, well, I'll have an update video on that regard at some point in the future. I just want to make sure that I have enough to add that isn't already being said. Now, the distinct lack of response in theory would prove this guy wrong, and to some extent it does, because what it shows is that they don't lash out at someone critiquing the game nearly as much. But the majority of the response I get on any of these videos is actually people agreeing with me, so that was already proven to be the phenomenon of the vocal minority picking up the fucking megaphone. But that's the thing. Both sides of this suddenly fall silent when I bring up that I didn't like what Kuro did. And you could chalk that up to the fact that there's far worse Wuthering Waves discourse out there than what I have to say, but another side of it is that they could be plugging their ears when someone they would like to perceive as an outsider criticizes them, which is actually how the echo chamber around Helluva vs. Games when it comes to criticism started in the first place. I would like to cite my work on saying that though. So let's talk about that. A lot of what I have to say can have easily cited examples when we're talking about the newest characters in the game. In the first Genshin video of mine that I'll be citing in this video, titled The Problem with Natlan That No One's Talking About, I talked about how the parasitic nature of Night Soul mechanics, specifically the Night Soul Burst, is a form of power creep that excludes older characters from new team compositions inherently. This reaction from the Genshin community was actually the most negative, with people citing that people are making teams with older characters and still using teams that don't use Natlan units at all, and how the Night Soul shields can be busted with rapid ticks of damage, which is technically true, but doesn't really address what my problem is. I'll cover this more thoroughly when I make my video explaining what parasitic mechanics actually are, since some of the misunderstanding here seems to be built on not knowing what that term means, but these counter arguments are working around the mechanic by ignoring it. But elaborating on that is for the parasitic mechanics video. I'm here to talk about Wuthering Waves. At the beginning of the 2.0 series of updates, one thing that the devs at Kuro talked about was using statuses applied to enemies in newer character designs, part of which included giving Spectro Rover the new ability to apply Spectro Frazzle. Thus far, this has only been something that's applied to Spectro Frazzle and Arrow Erosion, and to be fair, we have plenty of characters that still don't use these mechanics, but with the newest crop of characters in 2.3, I'm beginning to see some overtly parasitic mechanics crop up again, and while it could be done well, and I'll point out ways that it can go south too. Phoebe and Zanny are both DPS characters that care about the opponent having Spectro Frazzle. Now, Phoebe is a little more unique in this instance. She has a mode change where her primary goal is to apply Spectro Frazzle, so she can fill the role of a Spectro Frazzle applicator instead of a Spectro DPS. And the fact that I use the word applicator there should probably be ringing bells for anyone who's ever played Genshin in even a mildly sweaty capacity. So these characters have in text in their specific mechanics that rewards you for a specific mechanic another character uses. Guys, that's the definition of a parasitic mechanic right there. Now, something that gets lost on what I mentioned in that video is that it's not necessarily bad for a mechanic to be parasitic. And in fact, the way that Wuthering Waves is introducing them could lead to them being less parasitic, which I honestly think they're doing with the way that they're currently handling Arrow Erosion especially. The two characters that use Arrow Erosion, Arrow Rover and the upcoming Chakona, both interact with Spectro Frazzle as well, with Chakona being a direct Frazzle and Erosion applicator, and Arrow Rover being able to convert other statuses to Arrow Erosion including Spectrofrazzle. What this means is that when we have more characters that want you to apply Aero Erosion, possibly Cartithia if I had to just guess, we'll have characters that bridge between these two team types, including the potential for a hybrid team that uses both. This in turn decreases the parasitism of the mechanics, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to pretend that this is enough if they don't expand further on what they're doing with this. And even if they do, I'm also not going to pretend that this isn't keeping older characters out of newer teams in the same way that Natlan's Night Soul mechanic does. Just because they're doing it in a good way doesn't mean that there's no criticism to be had. Now, if they handle this correctly, even the characters that aren't in these new teams still won't be power crept out, but there's already talk about power creep in the form of what Zany does. I talked previously about how power creep is something that in some ways is inevitable, but can be handled in both good and bad ways. In fact, I'd argue that my main in Wuwa Brant is an example of power creep, in that he's a healer that has the damage of a main DPS. His ability to both heal and shield is a lot like the standard banner character Genshin, which I probably mispronounced. But he's got less of on-field uptime, his forte gauge builds up quicker, he heals more, it's easier to dodge with him, like a lot of things are straight up better. Like, he's probably the third best healer in the game, but fits into a niche at the top tier that shows he's not power creeping the entire game because of it. But now let's talk about Zany, and yeah, when your numbers are just better than the other characters, then that's typically the negative form of power creep. I don't have Zany. I can't speak to if playstyle or anything like that makes a difference, but when people talk about Zany being overpowered, do you know what I hear a lot of Wuthering Waves content creators saying as a defense against that? You can still clear the content without her. So, is there a memo in the Wuthering Waves community that I fucking missed? Isn't this the exact defense against HSR and Genshin's power creep that a lot of you guys dismiss? So for those of you that just played what I was saying in the background and just went true with actually... So for those of you that just played what I was saying in the background and just went true without actually absorbing what I was saying, because of the fact that I was criticizing Genshin was stroking your ego before, let me counter that argument for you too. You can clear the content now, but when Kuro has to design the endgame content to be challenging for those who have the most powerful setups, then it will in turn become that much harder for those that were power crept out. And like, this is even worse to say when you're talking about the devs listen game, because as some of you have pointed out, bad discourse on this game can actually do more harm here. The best way to not have a problem with power creep is to address the signs and the criticisms of it before it is a problem. Let the company know where the line is, rather than only telling them when they crossed it. Dismissing a point of critique just because it's not a problem yet is exactly how you get problems. Because what it tells the people making the game is that this is a point where you will fold. I'm not even saying that you can't disagree with these criticisms, because you absolutely can. For example, some of those in Wuwa's fanbase will cite the level of power difference between Zany and other powerful DPS characters, including very early ones like Jian, isn't really much of one, which is fine, but that simply points out why it's not a problem rather than why it's not a valid criticism, because something can be a valid criticism without it being end of service. Man, who could have guessed that people in gacha don't know the difference between slightly negative and terrible? It really shows your insecurities in how much you actually like any of these games when so many of you can't even withstand a minor critique of your game without acting like it killed your fucking dog. But what do you guys think? Do you have any criticisms that you feel are kind of just being ignored? Am I, in fact, Budget Tech Tone? Let me know how I killed your fucking dog in the comments, and be sure to leave a like on your way out. But until next time, this is the effing Boonslayer, signing out. Yo, this video came out like in under 10 minutes. I really thought I had more to say on this one. I've got like an hour and a half video, if you guys, if that wasn't enough for you guys. Check that one out.